All right, hi guys. So we're going to be continuing our understanding of food chains with moving on to the next level, which is a food web. So a food web is actually very similar to a food chain. It's just going to be a little bit more complex, in which is going to be multiple food chains that are interconnected and show all of the relationships within a ecosystem. So a food chain has like one level where it's just one organism per level. A food web will have many organisms per level and how they interact and uh, which things go to which animal. So as we go through this, I'm going to be introducing the term trophic levels. You guys have actually heard all of the trophic levels in the last one. The trophic levels would be the different consumers, the primary, secondary, tertiary. However, in this one, we're actually going to be pointing to where they would be placed within a food web. So same vocabulary, just in different placements. So as we go through this, the first thing that we need to understand is that these arrows are actually going to be denoting where the energy is flowing. So the flow of E, and a capital E is how we represent energy. So you can either use a capital E or you could actually spell it out. They're all the same, but the capital E is the flow of energy. So wherever the arrow is pointing to is the organism that is going to be eating that the one that's pointing away from, and that is where the energy is going. So this grass is being eaten by the grasshopper. The grasshopper is being eaten by the frog. The frog is being eaten by the snake, and the snake is being eaten by the hawk. Okay, so that's how the flow of energy is going to go. All right. Now, as we understand that now, we can then label everything just like we talked about in the food chain. So the grass, because the we know that grass is a plant, this would be the producer, because producers are the start of every chain, and a food web is just many chains, right? So this is still a producer. Next, all three of these organisms, grasshoppers, mice, and rabbits, all three are organisms that eat the grass, and so they are known as primary consumers, right? Anything that eats the producer is known as a primary consumer. So these three organisms. And you see, it's not just one chain now. We have three different organisms that are all relying on the grass as a food source. And so this is the difference between a chain and food web is we have many interactions within the ecosystem that are having to deal with these. Next, we're going to look at the organisms that are going to be eating these three primary consumers, and we can just look straight at where the arrow is going in order to understand that. So the rabbit has an arrow pointing to the fox. The hawk, the owl, has a chain with the mouse, which is also pointing to the fox and the hawk. So this is the interconnection. You see, the mouse is also going to the fox, and the rabbit's going to the fox, and the mouse is going to the hawk, and the rabbit's also going to the hawk. So now we can see there that each of these greater organisms, these greater consumers, have many food sources, not just one, like the food chain would have us believe, right? And the grasshopper is going to the frog, so there's also going to be in the bird. So all these that I circled in yellow would be known as secondary consumers because they are eating primary consumers, right? Secondary consumers are organisms that eat primary consumers. So in this chain, none of the secondary consumers are eating plants, but remember there are some secondary consumers that eat plants. In this case, they would be called omnivores, which means they eat plants and animals. But in this, they would all be carnivores because they only eat other animals. And then finally, we have our third level, which would be organisms that eat secondary. So we have to look at our secondary organisms, the ones that we circled in yellow, and we see if anything is being pointed away from them. So in this case, the owl is being pointed away from the frog. The frog is also going to the snake, and the bird is going to the snake. So those two organisms would be called tertiary consumers because they are second or third level on the chain. And what we do notice here is that there's actually a fourth level consumer in this one. So the hawk is pointing away from the snake, which means that even the third level in this chain is being eaten, which makes the hawk a secondary consumer and a fourth level consumer, which makes it the highest one in this food web, and also called a quaternary consumer. Okay, so quaternary just means fourth level, which is one above the third. So the snake is a third level consumer because something eats it. That puts the hawk at a fourth level. So it's a quaternary consumer. And then finally, because the hawk is the highest level here in this food web, it is also called an apex, or the top predator. So it's also an apex predator because nothing else is going to eat it. It is the top predator in this food web. So this hawk is going to be the apex. The fox could also be considered an apex because nothing is eating that either. But generally, you want to go with what organism is on the highest level when you're considering an apex predator. So that would be the hawk in this case. And that's how food webs work. So the arrows point to which organism is going to eat it. And it continues all the way up in those trophic levels from producer to primary consumer to secondary consumer to tertiary to quaternary consumer. And the apex predator will be right at the top. Okay, so that's pretty much everything that we need to understand. Let me go ahead and erase all of these beautiful markings that we have here. Sorry. So, just like we talked about, a food chain describes all the energy flow. A food web does the same thing. It just describes it in greater detail and has these interactions between the different levels of the ecosystem. So, food chain and food web are very, very similar. They do the exact same thing. The food web will just have more connections, more interconnection between the two levels. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. I hope you learned a little bit of something. If you didn't, make sure you ask a question. See you guys in the next one. Bye.